For more than a decade, we've loved the Marvel Cinematic Universe for all the movies they told, as well as now as TV series. But however, since the advent and the release of Zack Snyder's The Justice League, well, you know what I mean, there's just been a more important question. Has every single one of the MCU films really been the true director's vision? Hey everyone, Joe here from ActionX, and welcome to Let Joe Talk. It's the show where I basically ramble about stuff. I've been doing this for a long time now, for years now, and I've yet to really do something big in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU has been around for years now, and everyone has done every single topic, every single angle possible. And I'm pretty sure even what I'm about to talk about has been done already. But why not? I like doing my own spin on things. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been around now for more than a decade. And we've loved about, I'm going to say 85% of them. Of all the movies they've released, I'm being honest with you. I mean, Thor: The Dark World, you gotta agree with me on that one. You gotta agree with me on that one. But the thing that's more imperative now, as we've now live in a society, no pun intended, where Justice League happened, the studio version, and because of fans' support and because of the outwarming, like literally billboards, campaigns throughout the internet, we got Zack Snyder's Justice League. It worked because we showed them that studio interference sometimes is wrong in these types of movies. Just in general, in every movie. If you're a returning fan or a newcomer, here's my stance when it comes to movies. Let the directors, let the writers, let the cast make the movie. Let the creative vision flow. I understand at the end of the day, studios need to make money on these movies, and they need to be marketable and also profitable. I understand that to a T. I took classes on this. However, the thing that's more imperative is that I rather get a true director's vision or a true vision of a movie than get these studio interference. Like, studio interference is very common in the filmmaking atmosphere. I'm not surprised that once in a while we'll get like, oh, the studio wants this or that. And sometimes the visionary, the person behind the making of the movie, they will do it and somehow they'll make it work. There are cases like that. But then there are some cases, like the original Justice League, where it just does not work out, i.e. it failed. But then you look at Zack Snyder's Justice League, and that was leaps better than anything we saw back in 2017. Let's kid you that. But it's also opened up this door. The door that stresses that how many other movies are truly the director's version in the whole, like, you know, Zack Snyder's Justice League sense. How many are there? And specifically in the MCU, where, yeah, before I continue any further, yes, what they pulled off with the Infinity Saga is by far the most highest form of cinematic storytelling that will probably ever exist in our lifetime. That was a moment that my generation got to experience. I am so grateful for that. We may have had some hiccups along the way, but it was worth it. But now that we're 2 years after the conclusion of that, we've now had WandaVision, we now have the Falcon and Winter Soldier, we're getting Loki, Black Widow, What If, all these other projects. The next question is, well, the question I want to ask, and I actually look back on this, and I'm telling you what I found, is that how many we're just doing Infinity Saga here, we're not touching on the current projects. Of those 23 movies, how many of those are director's cut, or director's vision, whatever you want to call it, and studio version? How many of those are they in those specific categories? And then let's just weigh them out. Like, was it worth it? Or was it not worth it? That's basically the point I'm trying to make here. So with that being said, and for me, I'm about to lose my voice over this. So here we go. We're going to go for every single Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, all 23 of them. And we're just going to talk about them and see where they line up. And that starts up with the one that started it all, Iron Man. I remember 2008, I had to force my dad to go see Iron Man. We had just finished the Raimi trilogy of the Spider-Man movies, and I was starting to get him a little bit invested in this new world. I kind of knew this was going to kind of starting this bigger, larger franchise. I was a kid. This was 2008. I was a 5th grader, ready to graduate elementary school, going to middle school. This was by far the perfect film to kind of kickstart that next chapter of my life. Iron Man 1 remains one, I think it's still in my top 10 of all time, but it still remains the one that started it all. If it wasn't for Iron Man 1 and how unique and special and great it was, we would not have any of the movies that followed. We wouldn't. We have to give so much of the credit to that golden goat, and also to Robert Downey Jr. But moving onward, now looking back at it, now main question here, is Iron Man 1 a director's vision or a studio vision? I'm going to call it director's vision. If you don't know this already, because somehow I've been, it's not surprising but by this point, the original script for Iron Man was never finished. Because guess what? They didn't have a finished script when they were filming. They knew what the action pieces were they're going to do. They know what the big moments were. But when it comes to like the nitty gritty, every single line, they didn't have them written out. It wasn't written because this was the first of its kind. Like they knew like this was going to hopefully kickstart a larger universe. But also they, at the time, they were like really focused on telling this story about Tony Stark and him becoming Iron Man. That was the whole point of the first movie and him learning all these lessons. But at the time, like this was something they still had yet to perfect. They were doing a lot of improvisation on days. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised like if you're a studio head and like worried like, oh, I think we may have taken out the wrong loan here, everyone. This is, and I wouldn't blame them. I would not blame them at all. But however, somehow it came together. And it's all because, it's not just because of Robert Downey Jr. as the actor leading the ship. It was also Jon Favreau, who now in 2021, he's done Iron Man 2, which we'll talk about in a bit. He's done Chef, which I freaking love. And that was a pure Jon Favreau movie. Because when you see these small niche movies that these directors make, you see their true passion, the true creative vision they do. Chef, another Jon Favreau film, was definitely a film that he made. And then we got Lion King, and then we got Jungle Book, and then now he's doing The Mandalorian, and he's proving that he's a fan of these characters. He's a fan of these worlds, and he's showcasing that fandom in these characters, in these movies. And for Iron Man, that definitely powered through. That definitely did. And I really did see that vision. Now, looking back at it, it's like, yeah, Iron Man 1 was clearly a Jon Favreau film. So I put it on the pile of director vision. I don't know why. I was blanking there for a second. We're only one movie in. I'm already blanking. We've got 22 more to go. Next up, The Incredible Hulk. It's the black sheep of the franchise. I really feel sorry for it because me as a kid, this literally came out the month after Iron Man. So for me, it's like, oh my God, we get 2 superhero movies back to back. And yet, I know, yeah, The Dark Knight was a movie. So technically 3 movies. But we don't count The Dark Knight here. The Incredible Hulk came out. I was a little bit hesitant on seeing it because I was very, very, very traumatized by the original Hulk movie back in 2003. I did see that in theaters. I was scared shitless for a week. I kid you not. That was a fun week of school, me being scared of anything green. But when it comes to The Incredible Hulk, I thought that movie was pretty good. It's definitely in the low tier of my current ranking list. I'm assuming everyone's is. I think Edward Norton did a fine job as Bruce Banner in that iteration, and thankfully Mark Ruffalo has taken that character and raised it to new heights in the later movies we'll talk about in a bit. But when it comes to Incredible Hulk, I really don't know much of the director of Lou Lertree. I'm gonna butcher his name. I'm sorry. I'm going Lou. How about that, Lou? I'm sorry, director Lou. I'm sorry. I don't know much about his backlog prior to the Incredible Hulk. He was originally interested in directing Iron Man, then Jon Favreau got it, so he kind of got the pick of the litter. Well, not the pick of the litter. What's the terminology? Anyway, he didn't have his original choice, but he still did the best he can, and definitely I've heard some very disagreements. This was basically the movie was only made to just bring the Hulk to the MCU. That was basically it. That was the whole point of the movie. And sure, hopefully we'll see repercussions of this movie in the upcoming She-Hulk Disney Plus show. Hopefully we'll see them. But at least at this current time period, it was mainly serviceable just to bring Hulk into the larger universe. That was basically the whole point of this movie. And even I was reading that apparently there was a longer version of this movie being made. However, the studio wanted it to be under 2 hours. That I understand. I understand that completely. So it's weird to say because like this was very early on in the MCU, but however, I still got to point out that yeah, the studio only really needed this to bring Hulk into the MCU. That was the entire purpose. Because literally, out of the 4 corners of the Avengers solo films before the Avengers, Hulk was kind of like really left out. That movie like was really, for a moment in time, like we just didn't really consider it to be canon. Is that the word now? What the kids use? That was the whole. That was the whole thing, because they eventually recast him, and then we didn't really get that many references from that world until way later on in the MCU, when they started just accepting. Yeah, it's part of it. We accept it, but at the moment, I'm labeling it as a studio film, because they definitely just need to get him in there. Next up, Iron Man 2. And oh man, was I really hyped for this movie? Hell, I really wish I would have brought this out. When I pre-ordered the Iron Man 2 video game from GameStop, I got this like very small frame picture which came with two stills, like two cell stills, like the old-fashioned film from Iron Man 2. Which was pretty cool at the time. I really did. That video game I don't think I ever finished, but that's besides the point here. Let's get back to the movie. The movie did have Jon Favreau returning. This was obviously in response to how incredibly well Iron Man 1 made. They needed more time for the other movies, so it was like, okay, we can do another one. Let's do another Iron Man, and they did. And I can safely say Iron Man 2 is a studio film. I'm sorry to say that, because the thing is that for me, this is mainly an Avengers setup film. It really is. Introducing Black Widow, introducing the they just make way too many references. I forgot the name, the arc reactor, like the new element. They were trying so hard to make this work. They really did. Like putting a prototype Captain America shield in there just for the sakes of like, hey, Captain America is in this world. And then we have Coulson literally name dropping, like, yeah, I'm gonna go to New Mexico, which is where Thor is taking place. We really need that. Like, I know that's cool. I know you're universe building there, but honestly, there has to be the balance there, where sometimes I'm watching Iron Man 2, sometimes I'm watching a different completely movie all entirely, and then I'm also watching an Avengers setup movie. And even though I still had a blast seeing it as a kid, now watching it, it's definitely like, they should have focused more on like just continuing Iron Man's journey, and we'll focus on the Avengers stuff when we get to the Avengers. Especially once we got to like the big ending scene with Tony Stark and Nick Fury with like that holographic map behind them. It's like, okay, yes, we get it. There's like big things happening. We get it, but I wanted a better movie. I really did. I don't think Jon Favreau had 100% control over this, because when I was, even as a kid, I distinctly remember this. I was like always like hammering every day until we got Iron Man 2. I was reading they were thinking about doing Demon in the Bottle arc and talking about Tony Stark's alcoholism. And it's like, that would have been a pretty cool way to continue the story of Tony Stark and really tackle that aspect of the pre-Tony Stark, pre-Iron Man era that we didn't get to explore in the first movie. That would have been a really fun follow-up to explore, but they didn't do it. So I was a little bit, let down by that, but whatever. So right now we're on 3 movies in. We have 1 full director's cut and 2 studio visions. So I talked a lot, and we're only 3 movies in. I don't know if I can make it. Next up, Thor. Another one of those movies where I try to drag my dad into it. He found it boring because he doesn't like cosmic superheroes. He's a Spider-Man. He wants to see a real person behind the suit. That's basically all it is. Thor's different. Thor was different because like at the time, like Iron Man kind of was becoming a big deal. Then there's Thor, and the thing is that they had a double whammy. It's like, he's a god deity from lore, from mythos that you can choose to believe or choose not to believe. It's up to you. But in terms of in the Marvel comics, it's another different realm, because like now you're gonna have to bring this different sort of other realms. It's like the ability to like, hey, there are other worlds out there in the world. Like we've been on Earth this entire time, but there's other worlds out there. That's a different feat to like let a casual moviegoer be convinced by. And the director, Kenneth Branagh. So answer the question again: is this a Kenneth Branagh movie or is this a Marvel Studios movie? It's Kenneth Branagh. I don't know much of Kenneth Branagh. I just recently saw one of his other movies, Murder on the Orient Express, which I'm like, oh my god, perfect. Great movie. Love that movie. But before Thor, he did a lot of medieval, like a lot of, old-fashioned, like Shakespearean type films. And seeing Thor is like, yeah, definitely you can see the transition there, because a lot of the old, like when it comes to god portrayals or, portraying gods in like media, mostly it's going to be done in a Shakespearean type thing, which I think would at least for the first film, fit perfectly for Thor. Thor's gone through so many changes throughout the next few years and the next few films that it gets kind of like wonky to think about. He started here and now he's all the way here. In one movie, he's a very simplistic god In the current movie, he's wearing a red bomber jacket. Yes, that is still the same Thor. And Thor, I didn't view Thor as a studio movie because I do believe it was a lot complex to introduce Thor into this larger world, and I think it was better like, let's not add in so much comic stuff, not comic stuff. Let's not focus so much on like universe building here. Let's just make this breathe and make the viewers understand this before let's add an extra layer. So this was definitely a Canon brand film and definitely a director's cut movie. So far we're 2-2. Captain America, the First Avenger. And I'm kidding you not, I think I became a bigger fan of this movie than I think a lot of people let on. Because I think out of all of them, but like in terms of the big three, normally Captain America would just sit out because he was the movie just before the Avengers. Hell, he had the First Avenger in his subtitle, knowing that we are definitely setting up the Avengers. He's the last big piece we need. We need to get like the symbol, the leader into this universe. And honestly, this movie really performed. It really did. And it's definitely has aspects of like universe building with the Tesseract, Hydra, Super Soldier Serum. Like they definitely had a lot of like big universe, like long-term plot devices to use here. They definitely did. I'm denying that. But there's just something in this movie that I definitely see as this is something that was more passionate about. Because the director, Joe Johnston, I don't believe I saw any of his work. I haven't seen Jurassic Park 3 yet, and he did The Rocketeer, which I heard was a really great movie, but I haven't seen it yet. But from what I'm told about him, he's great in visual effect. That's kind of his jam. And after seeing Travis Knight and going to do Bumblebee after he did Kubo, that was definitely like, yeah, that could be done. I could easily see that. And viewing this period piece in the 40s with World War II and all these, it was colorful to me because, like, you know, World War II, like, obviously it's black and white, so any sort of propaganda or footage you see back then is definitely just, like, black and white because that's all they were able to get at the time. But when it came to this movie, like, definitely this had the color, it showed the pop, the wow, like, the retro feel to it, so I'm like, this definitely felt like a director's movie. It had heart, it had soul in it, and I really did like it at the time, and I still do to this day. So I definitely would consider this a Joe Johnston movie by a long shot. So now we're up to 3 director's cut and 2 studio vision. Now on to, of course, the big one, the Avengers. Oh my god, I still remember the hype in 2012. I still remember the trailer, the build up to it. Like every single day, I couldn't wait to see all these heroes teaming up on the big screen. And it was worth it. I think I saw the Avengers with like 6 people. So freaking good. Like somehow they made it work. Because it's the first time we see a superhero team, we don't count Fantastic Four, like on the big screen, like from other movies coming in to this bigger movie, and hope to God the viewers know, like, oh hey, this is the Thor from the Thor movie, this is Iron Man from the Iron Man movie, like this is still in that universe. And that was probably the biggest feat possible to be performed. And like there is no, like when Superman the movie came out, like a lot of films used that movie as the template for their movie because that kind of set the bar for these types of movies. The Avengers is the template for team up movies now, or for any sort of like movie that like is a franchise culmination, so to speak, or like culmination or bringing together. Like that's kind of how it is. It worked. And the director Joss Whedon, I'm not getting into all the controversies. I'm not getting into that. I'm just talking about this movie specifically. This definitely is a Joss Whedon movie because I don't even think they knew at the studios how to bring this all together. They didn't. And because at the end of the day, the Avengers are about the characters. They're the ones driving home the movie. And if you don't know how to write those characters specifically, you know, for 2 hours, it's going to be difficult for any viewer to stay on board and, you know, support this movie. And I believe Joss Whedon did a really good job on trying to, you know, hone that in, like bringing out these dynamics that we've never seen before, and, you know, playing with the different personalities of each of the Avengers. And definitely it did. Of course, obviously, it paid off so well that, like, look where we are now. It's just astronomical. I mean, it's crazy. So, Joss Whedon's The Avengers is definitely the movie that is definitely a director's cut. It definitely is. And also, yes, I know that he directed The Avengers and also sort of did 2017 Justice League, but we're not going to talk about that here. We're not. But just crazy how he's involved in the first, you know, ones of these big team, you know, live action movies. Just saying. On to phase 2, and my throat is already killing me. Iron Man 3. In this post-Avengers world, it was just so... I talked about this with Alan, like, at least the next year after we saw the Avengers. Like, how are they going to go back to just having these characters be on their own again? Like, I know in the comics it happens, like, they do the big team-up missions, and then they come back to their own solo missions. I know that's been done before. I'm not saying it hasn't been done, But at least for me, I was just curious how they were going to explore that in the movies, because, you know, why wouldn't Tony Stark call Captain America or Thor when he needs help? Like, that's obviously the simple question. And Iron Man 3 definitely, at the ground running, explained why they weren't going to do that, because the events of the film kind of prevented him from doing it. And no spoilers here, but Iron Man 3 is definitely a Shane Black film. I have not yet seen a Shane Black film beyond this one. I know there's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I know there's The Nice Guys. I know Predator's a thing. I know that, but I know he's done other movies. And I've heard that he had some, you know, vocal input into Iron Man 2. So he's been kind of around Iron Man for a while. So him taking the reins and him kind of like steering the ship back, is that Iron Man 3 felt like what Iron Man 2 should have been, or at least this is just a Tony Stark story. We are dealing with the events of the Avengers mostly. So we're picking up on that PTSD trauma. We are seeing that develop. However, the other thing that we need to focus on is that this is just about his world. You know, we know, the Avengers are out there. We get references, you know, we know all about that. But we don't need that to tell the story. Obviously, you need to see the Avengers to understand why Tony's like this. But this definitely could just felt like just the third part of the Iron Man trilogy alone. It does continue that story fairly well, and, you know, putting Tony to a new sort of like state that he never anticipated to be. And the amount of like just letting him do his own thing, this was definitely at the time something different than the MCU has done by that point. That definitely makes Iron Man 3 a director's vision for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So far on a good trend. I was actually really debating, like, was every movie studio cut? Like, not really. I mean, we only have 2 studio cuts. That's it. So far we're now up to 5 directors. Then we go to Thor: The Dark World. Hands down, that is, for me, the bottom of the barrel for the MCU. That is my least favorite film. It's still watchable, but it's not the best. It definitely is not the best. It doesn't even come close. Thor: The Dark World was definitely a studio film. It had things to accomplish. It had a checklist. We need to introduce another Infinity Stone. We need to continue Thor's story, but just keep it, like, very, you know, samey. Let's try not to, like, Iron Man 3 did some new stuff in that. Thor 2, or Thor: The Dark World, they vainly try to, like, let's keep Thor in this deity state, like, you know, this mystical state. Let's just keep him there, you know, and let's get someone that can actually, you know, direct this sort of like style of, you know, of storytelling. And then you brought Alan Taylor, who directed Game of Thrones episodes. So basically this was Marvel Studios' Game of Thrones with Thor. This was basically it. And sad to say, it didn't work out all the time. Like, I did not think this was the best. And this was ironic, because I think this was the first movie I did a DVD unboxing for back in the day. So I'm like, I know I should be holding that in with a bigger place in my heart, but I just can't. This is definitely a studio film. Like, this definitely was meant to set up another MacGuffin for the future movies to use. They definitely did. And I just feel like this was kind of just like a middle of the road movie. It just didn't really do much for the characters. It kind of just, they could have just like done like point A, point B. There you go. They could have just done that. We didn't really need, Malachi wasn't a great villain, that sort of thing. You know, I feel sorry for Christopher Eccleston, since I just did a every Doctor Who series reviewed with George, and I really liked him as Doctor Who. So I was very bummed that, you know, this is the way he got into Marvel, and, you know, it just didn't pan out correctly. So, but what can you do on that? So Thor: The Dark World, definitely a studio cut picture. Hell, even before I move on, even Josh Whedon came in to rewrite some lines. So, like, yeah, definitely the studio's like, yeah, get in there, go fix some stuff. It's like, even the studio, and you're like, you didn't even let Alan Taylor try to fix it. Like, no, just have Josh Whedon do it. Simple. Which kind of sucked, but I'm like, yeah, that's kind of fun. So now we're up to 3 studio cuts film. And then on to Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That movie is so freaking perfect. It just, I don't know how. Because, like, me reading with the Russo brothers, a pair of comedy directors were going to direct a Captain America movie, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Like, you know, just shits and giggles always. That's what I was thinking back in the day when I was leading up to this movie, and I saw the trailers. Then I saw the movie with, actually that was the first movie I saw with George. That was the start of our friendship. So it does hold a special place in my heart for that one. And that movie was just so freaking good that it just tempers with your expectation. Like, it blew your mind up, and like, leaving the theater that day definitely changed my viewpoint on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It definitely did, and it just like made me question so many motivations. And that was the beginning of like, oh my god, the impact these movies can have on the larger universe. And it was so crazy. And at the time, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a thing, and it was also being impacted by the events of those films. When you know, those movies, when the show was canon. at the time for it. It's like, oh my god, it was just unbelievable. And that definitely was set the Russo brothers on the map. So yes, Winter Soldier, definitely a director's vision. Definitely. Hands down. And enough praising about Winter Soldier. Let me praise about Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember seeing the original logo for it, and I was thinking to myself, what? Guardians of the Galaxy? I mean, I know you don't have Spider-Man, X-Men, or Fantastic Four, but I'm like, really? Who the fuck are the Guardians of the Galaxy? And that's what everyone thought back in the day. Everyone thought, like, this is the movie that's going to flop. This is the movie that's going to ruin the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It really was. Who the fuck is James Gunn? He wrote the Scooby-Doo movies, the live-action ones from 2002 and 2004. We're screwed. And then I saw the movie with a bunch of friends, and I kid you not, we laughed the whole freaking movie. And they made me care about these characters I've never heard about before in my life, and now I love them? How do you do that? And that's because of the magic of James Gunn. Something about him, and we'll get back to him in a bit, something about him and his mindset and his writing it makes you care about these characters that, like, have, for me, no iconography at all. Like, if you had just put Spider-Man and Star-Lord together, I would have been like, who the fuck is Star-Lord? And I apologize for my language, but I would have been completely honest with you. I did not know those characters. And they took very talented actors, Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Bradley Cooper, freaking Vin Diesel. They put them together, and it works. It somehow worked. It had heart. It had soul. It just... Wow, like... And Guardians 1 is still up there on my highs, and I'm just thinking, like, how did they do it? How did he do it? And definitely, I don't believe the studio had any sort of interference. They just let James Gunn do his thing, and it was like, it paid off. So Guardians of the Galaxy, definitely a director's cut, definitely was. Now on to Avengers Age of Ultron. It's kind of weird how much leniency people give it nowadays after WandaVision. It really is, because when I was watching WandaVision, I definitely felt, I kind of want to watch Age of Ultron again. I never did, but I'm like, Age of Ultron wasn't that bad as people say it was. I think it was not the best of the 4 Avengers movies. I definitely don't think it was better than anything else we've seen before. But they did the best they could, because it was more of like a Phase 3 set. Like, this was the Iron Man 2 of Phase 2. This was setting up Infinity War Endgame, setting up Thor Ragnarok, but when it was before you'll hear what I call. They were setting up Wakanda for Black Panther. They were setting up Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, like this existence of powers, like more specific powers. Like, they were trying to introduce everything in that, as well as just tell an Avengers story. And it was just way too late. You had layers on layers on layers of layers, and you were just trying to tell this cohesive story that, like, I know Joss Whedon had his best intentions at the time, but did we really need a scene where Thor had to get a vision of, like, doing this and just, like, seeing, like, future events and seeing, like, the Infinity Stones, they're going to be important in the future. You have to find a way to stop it. And obviously, we didn't need that scene. That was definitely, like, just, again, sorry for my language, cock teasing for Infinity War, which, again, I know it pays off now, but in the moment in 2015, like 3 years removed before seeing Infinity War and then Endgame, I was like, was it really worth the sacrifice? Was it really worth it just to, like, set up future sequels but you got to focus on making sure this one is making the money so you can get to those sequels. So I know, again, that's what I said before at the start of this topic. Like, at the end of the day, the Infinity Saga was worth it. Every little sacrifice, every little give up we made was in service for the larger good that led to Endgame's, like, masterful conclusion. But you kind of risked losing some of the creative vision on the other collaborators on the way. Joss Whedon was burned out. He just didn't want to do more Avengers movies because, like, that movie just took so much out of him, just dealing with both what he wanted to do and what the studio needed to do. It was too much. It really was. So Age of Ultron definitely was a studio movie. Definitely not a Joss Whedon movie at all. It definitely wasn't. So now we're up to reaching... Actually, I'll come back to this in a bit. Ant-Man. I'm so confused how to label this as, because if you ask the one and only, it's just George. He was so hyped for Ant-Man because it was an Edgar Wright movie. And then Edgar Wright left the project. And they couldn't remove it off the slate, so I was like, we got to film Ant-Man. We got to do it. And they were just scrambling around. It's like, what do you even call it? Because, like, you had elements of Edgar Wright in there, in the script, and in the final movie. But the studio had to put it together. Like, they could not remove it off the slate. Like, they were going to put him in Ant-Man in Civil War. So they needed that character introduced and ready to go for that movie. But at the same time, like, this wasn't the original intent. Like, Ant-Man was a character, like, they wanted to make a movie out of, but they never had, like, big plans for him. And then when they kind of were said, like, okay, 2015, this is it. You have to release the movie back then. And then, you know, creative differences. I think that was, like, one of the very first big examples where, like, the director was, like, so close to getting production started, and then he left the project. And then they had to scramble. No offense to Peyton Reed. He did a pretty good job, like, cobbling this film together and trying to, like, make it a good watchable movie at the end. But it's so weird because, like, there's elements and DNA of Edgar Wright in there, but also having to also conform to the larger MCU world. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it is a studio film at the end of the day. It was just meant to, like, get Ant-Man into the MCU, and then, you know, we'll have a proper Ant-Man movie, like, developed from the scale up down the line. But at least for Ant-Man 1, it definitely was just a studio pick. It definitely was. So far we're up to 5 studio cuts, and also 7 director's cuts. So far the ratio is getting kind of close. Civil War happens, and it's very hard to say because development-wise, I've heard stories that, like, you know, Civil War, in terms of a studio director, was only imperative if RDJ was to come back as Tony Stark to fulfill the storyline. And they did have plans to do something else, but of course, obviously, the original plans were like, yeah, we need the Civil War to happen. We definitely needed to have. That's going to set up everything for the rest of Phase 3. And it's so weird because, like, the Russo brothers, they did so much work to kind of still make it feel like their own movie, but also, like, make it serviceable to, hey, we got to set up these larger things. And I think the Russo brothers are probably one of the best people, and plus James Gunn, to, like, really get in there. And it's like, we could still tell a movie that we want to tell, and we would happily put our names as directors of, as well as this is going to be a bigger thing down the line when it comes to other movies. And Civil War definitely was that. It definitely had those elements of, like, yeah, this is still a true to form Russo brothers. Really, you feel the same energy as it was with Winter Soldier, and obviously this was definitely breaking up the current status quo of the larger MCU going forward. So it definitely was a studio piece as well. So with that being said, I'm gonna put it in both camps because, like, it's just so split down the line on how much they had to do. So, but then again, they had to put Black Panther in there to set up his movie, so it's kind of tricky. And Spider-Man 2, so. But the Russo brothers wanted that way, so I'm going to say, yes, it was a conjoint effort. So I'm putting it in one camp each. This is just probably one of the rare examples where, like, both visions just came together perfectly. It really was. So now we're up to 8 director's cuts, which is very weird to say. And I'm like, maybe I should reconsider that, but whatever. Doctor Strange. I really love Doctor Strange. I really do. I would have the pop, like, in my hand right now if I can grab it, but I'm like, well, there's just too many pops and this is all the way up there. It's just way too hard for me to grab and get off camera. I love Doctor Strange, the movie. I really did. It was the only MCU movie I got to see alone because my friends were busy at the time and no one wanted to see it with me. So I was very bummed out. But Doctor Strange really worked. It really did. It's just something about it that just made it work. And when you see that much passion to it, when it comes to the director, Scott Derrickson, which even though his genre was mainly horror related, he still was a Doctor Strange fan, and he still saw, like, the vast, you know, supernatural elements that could come to play into telling this movie, and it definitely did. It showcased that. Like, this is probably some of, like, the biggest visuals, some of the biggest things I've ever seen at the time. And this definitely did, like, open the world to, like, the magical corners of the MCU. And it worked. It worked so well. I know this was kind of like setting up the MacGuffin with, you know, the Time Stone and, you know, bringing in Doctor Strange, introducing all these, the magical elements. I get that at all. But Scott Derrickson did something like the passion he wanted for this movie showcased through. Plus, I'm a sucker for Mads Mikkelsen. So I think Doctor Strange definitely was a director's cut and, you know, definitely does deserve to belong in that pile of, you know, just really good MCU movie, like really freaking solid. On to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. James Gunn, he does it again. Loved Guardians 1. We love these characters. Let's see more of them. And we got more of them. And it didn't feel like an epic scale adventure that, you know, these sequels tend to size themselves. They just continued telling their story and it worked. It told a much smaller personal story that eventually did end up being a near galaxy ending thing, but, you know, it was still at the start very small, didn't really do that big. It was just telling the characters continuing their journeys together now as a dysfunctional family. And again, it makes it makes you tear up at the end with everything that happened. And just that can only happen because the director just has so much passion to it. And James Gunn once again delivered for the second time in a row. So I'm putting in a definitely Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 definitely is the Gunn cut. The Gunn cut? Gunn cut. I'm out of jokes here, everyone. I am just completely out of jokes. Spider-Man Homecoming. I remember the hype I had when they announced Spider-Man is joining the MCU. It was probably the biggest thing to happen in the landscape of media, of the fandom, that two studios were putting aside their differences to bring in this character, to allow him to appear in this larger shared world, as well to allowing for him to tell stories in that shared world, is probably the rarest thing to ever happen in the land of Hollywood. And Homecoming was really, really damn good. It really was. At the time, I thought like it was better than Spider-Man 2. Looking back, I'm like, I really did like it. I really did. But Spider-Man 2 just really edges it out too much. But enough about that. Homecoming-wise, John Watts, it was an indie filmmaker. I didn't really know much of his work beyond that. And it was definitely a feat because like every Spider-Man director at the time had to put their own vision, their spin on it. No pun intended. Raimi had a much more grounded and much more like character, heart-driven approach. I know always with Spider-Man 3. Mark Webb did want to tell like more of the fantastical side of things, telling a different type of story for this, which sadly he never got to do. And John Watts, he just wanted to deliver the best comic book Spider-Man that we've ever seen before. And he's definitely succeeded. He definitely did. It's so complicated to view it because I always see Spider-Man being promoted in the MCU as like producer standpoint or Tom Holland's standpoint. I rarely saw John Watts talk about the character. So it's so hard to gauge it. But you need the director to set the vibe. You definitely need them to like kind of lead the ship, and considering how very complex this being a Marvel Studios movie as well as a Sony Pictures movie, I think definitely I'm gonna have to give it to John Watson this one, like, you know, him taking the reins and him definitely like, you know, putting his spin on it. Again, no pun intended, but that's the way I view it on this one. So into the director's vision pile. Next, finally, Thor Ragnarok. 3 movies in 2017. That was a big year for the MCU. Like we went from 2 to 3. Yeah, I'm shaking my hand 3 like in Doctor Strange, or just like in the hand thing. When Thor Ragnarok was being promoted back in 2014, I want to say, like the text font they used, like we were going to like use, this was going to be Thor's Winter Soldier moment. They still definitely kept that. And I was so surprised at how very uniquely different Thor Ragnarok was than its predecessors. And how freaking silly and colorful and wanky and like this. If you had shown me Thor 1 and this one back to back, I'm like, are you sure this is the same universe? These are 2 separate iterations. And like, no, this is the same Thor. But he's just thrown in a different direction because it has a different leadership, a different style. And that's all because of the very twisted mind of Taika Waititi. And how did he do it? Like, no one expected this guy. Because like, I look at the name and like, they were just desperate for a director, I'm assuming. Like, but it worked. He did something different. He put soul back into Thor because, like, I never viewed Thor to be special. I mean, sure, he was cool, but, like, I never thought, like, what was his special charm? And then seeing Ragnarok, it's like, they gave him that special charm, and it freaking worked. I love that. That was the best Thor movie I've ever seen in my life. And I know there's only been 3 so far, but, like, I'm just saying, God, I can't wait for Love and Thunder. I can't wait for that one. But, yeah, definitely Thor Ragnarok was definitely a Taika Waititi film through and through. Absolutely no way the MCU, Marvel Studios, was going to let that happen. Absolutely not in their mindset. But it works. It paid off so well, and it revitalized Thor for like now future movies to come. And I'm so excited to see where they go next with it. And then we reach to Black Panther, and I was feeling way more hyped about this movie because of one man, Ryan Coogler. And if you still don't know him, you gotta know his name because he does. So far, he has not let me down in this movie. He is not. I have not seen Fruitvale Station yet. I should. I know it's on my list. I saw Creed, and it was like, how do you make it work? You're such a freaking. He's just like, he knows how to tell the story, and he knows how to tell these characters well as pay tribute to their heritage and where they came from, and always remember where they start from, and bringing that energy to Black Panther. It definitely worked. It it was such a big culture phenomenon at the time. Like, getting a movie called Black Panther in theaters. Oh my god, like I've heard stories of like people who have never seen an MCU film before, just like this was their version of Spider-Man. Like this was a character like they knew about, finally got a movie, they got to see it, and it's like, this was great. And there's more movies like this. Well, not exactly like this, but like a much more bigger franchise. Beautiful way to get people into the universe, and it definitely worked out. I really dig the movie. CG is kind of wonky at times. You could blame it on the lighting. You could blame it on like the futuristic style of it. You could say either or, whatever. But Black Panther like definitely had a story to tell. It definitely knew how to tell these characters fairly well as well. And I really loved Black Panther. I really did. Definitely is another Ryan Coogler movie. Definitely is a part of the director's cut. Now up to 12. But let's power for big one, Avengers Infinity War, and that is definitely a studio movie. I'm sorry. We didn't even know the Russo brothers were being picked for directors. We didn't know anything at the time of the announcement. They were planning a two-parter for this one. That definitely was a studio movie. The Russo brothers came into like, you're the only ones like very confident enough to steer the ship, so y'all got to do it. I mean, sure, they put their own flair to it, but like definitely through and through, with the way everything was being set up, Infinity War definitely was a studio movie through and through. Like, you can say that about all the Avengers movies, because like they're meant to be culminations. Like, they have to cross over these characters to fulfill that quota, to fulfill that storytelling segment. So Infinity War definitely was a studio piece through and through. I mean, it was a great movie. It was great, but definitely the studio need that movie to happen. It definitely had the control of it. No one was going to pitch that movie ever in a million years. Well, maybe a fan would. Ant-Man the Wasp. Again, I have never seen much of Peyton Reed's work before Ant-Man 1. I have not. So I don't really know how this is supposed to go. I mean, I see it more... It came out at such a weird time because, like, it came after Infinity War. Like, they had to be very careful where this was taking place in the timeline because they didn't want to spoil anything. But they didn't really have to do much with the larger MCU. They made references, of course, but they never really went out of their way to, like, truly get into, discontinued their story through and through. And, they were just coincidentally placed after Infinity War, so they had to make some adjustments, and it was another, like, oh, we're tackling on some stuff from Civil War. So although I don't know much about Peyton Reed as a person in terms of his director style, but beyond this one, I'm gonna give it to Peyton Reed. I'm gonna give it to him. I think he definitely made it his own. Finally, they had to let go of whatever Edgar Wright was planning and start doing their own thing, which definitely paid off. It definitely did, and I just love the dynamic between Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly. I definitely do. Captain Marvel. I remember this movie. My stomach had a heart attack. Actually, I never had a heart attack. I don't know why I said that. I mean in the sense of, like, I remember seeing Captain Marvel with my friends. We had sushi that day. And I ate a lot of it. It was a big mistake. That was the day I knew I fucked up. But I saw Captain Marvel. I thought it was okay. I definitely think it's a studio movie. I definitely do. Because they cast Brie Larson way before the directors had any sort of say of, like, who they wanted for the role. That was definitely a studio plan. I mean, like, they knew we want to bring Captain Marvel to the MCU. We knew that they didn't have anyone attached to it at the time of the announcement. So I'm like, yeah, this was planned out. They needed that character to come through. They needed to figure out a way to bring her in. And the directors had visions. They definitely did. But considering the way, like, they had to, like, give this character ready to go for Endgame, this definitely was a studio movie. They definitely had to play their cards right for it. I still liked Captain Marvel. I still did. But I don't think it could have been quite as bigger had they just let this, like, breathe organically without all the MCU tie-ins. And I'm very hopeful to see where Captain Marvel 2 is going to go in the future, but that's neither here there. And then finally, the biggest one ever, and I still can't believe it was 2 years ago, Avengers Endgame. And also, I completely forgot. I really, really wanted to put this shield out. This is not the shield from the first one. This is the Falcon Winter Soldier shield, but I just wanted to showcase it. Endgame definitely was a studio movie. Definitely was. This was well planned out. Hell, even when that pre-VFX shot that got released, I think, a few months back or last year, that revealed that, yeah, Marvel would sometimes, like, pre-plan out their movies at time by doing these VFX shots, which a lot of directors kind of weighed in and said, like, well, no, they use it for, like, helping out conceptualize what the vision was going to be for a specific scene. But at the same time, yeah, you kind of figured that, like, well, this is how it's got to go. And it's like, you got to fit whatever you're going to do, you got to have these fit in there somehow. So Endgame definitely, despite it being a masterful conclusion, it worked out in the end. But it definitely was a studio film at the end of the day. And finally, Spider-Man: Far From Home. putting this away. It's heavy on my chest. I'm being very critical here. I did not like Far From Home as much as Homecoming. I think it's funny. Like George and I talk about this. Like he loved George is my best friend, by the way. I think I forgot to mention it. He did not like Homecoming as much as Far From Home, and I didn't like Far From Home as much as I like Homecoming. Like we're very vice versa on those opinions, and to each their own. But I definitely felt like Far From Home had a lot to do. It definitely had to be Spider-Man's second solo adventure, an endgame epilogue, an epilogue to the Infinity Saga, a brief setup for what a post-endgame world's going to look like. There was just so many layers, and briefly touching upon the multiverse. They had just so much going on. I really just wanted to be a pure Spider-Man flick. And they had elements in, like, the shades are there, like Iron Man 2, like Avengers 2, like the shades of the pure sequel for that character story is in there, but they just pile on so much to do. They really did. I saw it with my dad. Even my dad said, like, I don't understand half of what's going on. It's like, I know, because you didn't watch anything else before this, so that's your fault. But I as much as I love Spider-Man, like, this was, like, I think the first time, like, in the MCU, like, this was definitely a studio. This was Marvel Studios having to steer the ship for its future in the MCU. And thankfully they renewed the deal, because otherwise I probably would have freaking rage quit as a fan. And also to Kevin Feige out there, and this is the last off-topic thing about this topic we're doing, confirmed Tobey Maguire for No Way Home already. Do it! Okay, so with that being said, this is your final total. So I'm actually surprised how very close it was. But I'm honestly very surprised how many director's visions went through and through at the end of the day. I'm really happy. But again, will we ever know the specifics? And again, mostly this is me speculating based on what we have out there in terms of information, and also what the directors have said, before and after their movies came out. I mean, a lot has changed, in terms of the director's landscape. I don't know how Black Widow was affected, considering it had to be a very specific corner. Eternals might be a director's vision one. Shang-Chi might be director's vision. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that's definitely a studio flick, but I love Doctor Strange so much, so I'm like, I'm fine with it, in a way. I'm fine with it. Sorry, I'm feeling on my chest for a second. I apologize. It's just crazy. Like, no matter if I may have said some criticism, and you're allowed to criticize whatever you want. This is the free world, so don't worry about it. I do believe that, like, hopefully going forward, like, besides certain big tentpole things, like, mostly we let the directors do what they need to do. We let the writers tell the story they want to tell, and then let the actors perform it through and through. That's my belief for all the movies I see. And hopefully we get an IR cut for Suicide Squad. Maybe someday down the line we'll get, like, more information of what things could have been had there not been a massive, cinematic universe in the world. Who knows? We'll see how the world works. We'll see how it is. But for me as a fan, I'm still going to stay along for the MCU ride until the day I die. And hopefully it'll end before I die, because I don't think how I would handle, like, being in heaven or the afterlife and just not having MCU stuff to enjoy, if you know what I mean. Hopefully hopefully that's like 60 years from now, but, like, who knows? The world is crazy. The world's crazy. But I can't wait to see more. But until then, this has been Let's Joe Talk. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with any of my thoughts? Or do you not agree with any of my thoughts? Let me know. Also, my throat is dying, so I'm going to end it soon. Like, I legit went, I don't know how long I went talking. This is probably the longest I've talked solo-wise in a long-ass time. But with that being said, if you enjoyed this episode of Let's Joe Talk, we've done tons of others on other topics, on other corners of this large earth. Go check it out on youtube.com/ActionX. Ring that bell for notification when our next Let's Joe Talk episode is live, which is going to be quite a while. Like or share this video if you want to. It helps us out, get us out there to other people who have yet to discover us. Helps us out beat that YouTube algorithm, as well as, remember, sharing is for free. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for hearing me out, listening to me as my throat closes up. But until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, stay marvelous, and as always, peace out.